Hi, in this video I want to talk about how I set up my projects, set up my infrastructure, and how I deploy things into production for my app Inventory.io. So, spoiler alert, I use SST to deploy my things. If you cannot already see, it's right here. But I use it to deploy my resources into production and also into dev and everything else. It's a great tool. When I say it's a great tool, it's because it helps me also learn AWS as well. I don't just learn the tool, I also learn the infrastructure it's deploying. So that's why I say it's a great tool. They've released version 3 recently, and there's a great video on how they built Terminal Shop with it, which I'll link below. If we get straight into it, you can have a look into my project structure. So it's a monorepo template that I copied over from examples. We have the infra, which stores all my infrastructure, the packages directory, which stores all my code, the SST config, which is where all the the infrastructure is run in. Here we can see the name of the project, removal procedures. Home is where it stores the state of the app, and then the region that I want my resources to be deployed to, which is EUS2. And also we've got async run, which is where it imports all my infrastructure and runs it. If we have a look at my infrastructure folder, you can see that I have a bunch of resources that I've created. We can go into one of them. So bus, this is where I've got my bus, which is something I created manually on AWS, but I can import that resource into SST, and SST will manage that resource from now on. And then we've got my front end. I use a Remixer application instead of Next.js, but again, you do you. If you prefer using Next.js, it's Next.js. But I like Remix because of the way it handles the load and actions and the way it uses forms and everything. So I prefer the way it does things. It just works better with the way my brain works. And then we've got queues. These are some resources that I use for my app to run some long processes. So I create some queues, and then I've got a subscriber function which runs the queue messages that are inside. And if you have a look here, we've got a link. Link is where you can link other resources inside whatever resource you're using. So this Lambda function needs some secrets, which is another resource I'll get into. And then we've got my secrets, which I've set. And the thing is, you can see here I've got prod env and secrets env. I load them in by doing pnpm SSD secret load, and then load the file in, and then it populates all the secrets. But you can also enter them one by one by doing secret name of secret and then the secret itself. You can do it that way as well. You can also, I've got prod file or prod env that you can see, and then I can do load prod env stage prod. This basically sets them in production. So when I deploy it, it creates those secrets in production. And if I've got my GitHub workflows, I won't have to set the secrets there. I can set it here manually, and then the GitHub actions will auto see that the secret's are already there and saves me the hassle. So enough about my infrastructure. Let's have a look at my packages. My packages store my core functionality, my front end, my functions, and my scripts. I don't really use scripts very much, but I've essentially tried to emulate the way that the SST monorepo example has shown, and also the way that some of their repos, their actual repos are structured, because I've read through them and they're really good. Especially as a newbie like myself working on this, it's just like pretty cool to see. If we have a look into core, so core stores my core functionality. Like I said, it has my database, and I've tried to set up a domain driven design kind of thing. So DDD. The thing is, some of the folders are not currently in their own domains, so it's still kind of a mess, but I'm trying to emulate it. But I also want to be in a situation where I don't want to be in a situation where I'm trying to force something into a domain. If I think it doesn't work, I will try to create its own folder. I'm trying to be fluid about it. There is one thing I copied from the SST console and the terminal shop repo. It's this context and transactions. We've got transaction, which essentially lets me use a transaction. It lets me use transaction if the context for a transaction exists. If it doesn't, it falls back to using the DB call instead. And then we've got a create transaction, which creates the transaction instead if there is no transaction. I use those when I want to compose my transactions into separate functions instead of having one large transaction. I didn't know I could do that, so a win. Now let's move back to my front end. So again, like I said, I'm using a Remix app. Nothing really big there. It's just some JavaScript and some React code and Tailwind. So functions is where I store my long running processes. This is like importing everything from Shopify to eBay or eBay to Shopify. And then we've also got my Shopify function, which essentially just handles all the webhooks. And we've got my fetch, which gets everything from your stores into my app. So these are all long running processes that take forever to do in a request response cycle. So it's all just popped into a message queue and done in the background. And then again, we've got the scripts. There's nothing in there currently because I don't really use it. Yeah, that's my project structure. And then we have my GitHub workflow. I mentioned before that you can use stages to set up production and dev. You can also, production and locally, but you can also use stages to set up a dev environment, test environment, and production environment, and they'll all have their own separate resources so you can deploy to whichever one. I've got a Git workflow, which I can show you how it works. This is the workflow I have. I've got 3 environments of sorts. So if I take that, I've got 3. Look at this. Main. Dev. On my local branch. My local Git. So I've got main dev and my local. The way I work is I will make my changes in local. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then let's say once I've done all my changes, I'm ready to push it into dev. I push it into dev, and then in dev I will test it. So this will be, let's say, feature 1. So I push it into dev and see if it works, because I'm trying to make dev emulate main when dev shouldn't really be dev. It should really be a test environment. But in dev I will basically test it, make sure everything works there, and then if that works fine, I push it into main. So we've got main, and this is when the feature works and everything's ready. So it should really be called local test and main environment, but we've got dev, and then I carry on working in my test environment. So I carry on working as is, and again, same procedure. I push it into dev and then push it into main. Once everything works, I test it. So this is essentially my release. I've got it structured like that, and I carry on working on local, push. And I've got a GitHub Actions that runs pm SST deploy -- save dev. So I've got this in a GitHub workflow that when it's done its test, it deploys the stage to dev. So that's essentially how my stuff works. Again, I think SST is a great tool if you want to learn AWS. And if you're intimidated like I was when I first started learning AWS, I think SST gives you the little steps, as in deploy the resources that you want without being overwhelmed by everything else and slowly pick things up. I think SST is a great tool to learn. If you want to read through their docs, I'll put a link down below. If you have any questions about my project, feel free to do so. If you want to see anything in depth, again, feel free to tell me. And yeah, I think that's it. Bye.